Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. I'm very humbled and very honored by your kind remarks. And how about I know this is the closing luncheon after a terrific week of the ALEC State and Nation Policy Summit. You've heard from people like Paul Ryan and Ted Cruz, and this morning one of your own, Senator Green, and Grover Norquist will be your wrap-up speaker. Why don't we give Linda Upmeyer a round of applause for a fantastic job leading this conference. I really am delighted to be with you all and to be joined by so many men and women that are a part of proving every day at the state level that it all still works. Bringing common sense, conservative ideals into state legislatures around the country, putting them into practice. You are a source of great hope for the nation. And let me just say, with all of my biases disclosed, it is a particular joy coming from the state of your immediate past national chairman, Dave Frizzell, your new treasurer, Senator Jim Buck, and a table full of Hoosiers. I am proud of the Indiana General Assembly, and it is a great conservative majority in the House and Senate. Good to be with you all. And I also want to offer my congratulations to you today on the 40th anniversary of the founding of the American Legislative Exchange Council. It's extraordinary to think of an Illinois state representative, an old colleague of mine named Henry Hyde, who was in the State House at the time, who came together with the late Paul Weyrich and a few others with an idea about creating a council of men and women around the country who would be bringing fresh ideas, grounded in the principles of limited government in a renewed way into our State House. So heartfelt congratulations on 4 decades of the extraordinary difference that ALEC is making. It is a genuine honor for me to be with you today. Some of you may know that before the last year of service, where I've had the privilege of being governor of the state of Indiana, I actually worked in this town for 12 years. And in fact, let me just say, having served in Congress for 12 years, I can honestly say that if I only had 12 years left to live, I'd want to live it as a member of Congress, because that was the longest 12 years of my life. I mean, I have to tell you, the difference between what we've been able to do in the Hoosier State in 12 months compared to the frustration under successive administrations, I might add, as a conservative over a 12-year period of time is truly astounding. I mean, I want to tell all of you that experience convinces me more than anything that after 12 years in Washington, D.C., and 12 months as governor of the state of Indiana, I am persuaded the cure for what ails this country will come more from our nation's state capitals than it ever will from this nation's capital. I mean, a little expected boasting on behalf of the Hoosier State and our great General Assembly. I mean, just think about it. In just 12 short months, we passed an honestly balanced budget. We were able to reduce debt by $300 million in the state of Indiana, even while we were expanding funding for infrastructure, more than $800 million in new funding for roads. We expanded educational choice. We preserved our AAA bond rating. And all the while, we managed to pass the largest state tax cut in Indiana history. That's the difference that you can make at the state level. It really is just like Linda Upmeyer just said. States are where things get done. And I'm here to say today, in the brief time that I have, as Grover Norquist's warm-up act. And let me say, I've heard Grover many times, and I don't follow Grover. But let me say, I truly do believe, if I have one message, it's what Linda already said. I really do believe states are the solution. And I want to make that case with passion and sincerity in the few minutes that I have with you today. And you know, there's no greater example of this than the extraordinarily failed rollout of the Affordable Care Act. Obamacare was a mistake, and this legislation must be repealed. But you know, the problem with Obamacare is not a website that doesn't work. The problem with Obamacare is that it's actually working exactly as it was designed. People are losing their health insurance. And the only reason it's only been millions of Americans losing the health insurance that they like, instead of tens of millions, it's because they delayed the business mandate by another year. I mean, men and women, I was on the floor of the Congress during those debates. And I remember the rolling of the eyes in the national media when we said the way this is designed, the taxes and the incentives and the mandates, millions of Americans will lose the health insurance they have and be relegated off to either a federal or a state-based exchange. It's how it was designed. The contrast, if you will, at the state level, we're proud of in Indiana. This year, we managed to secure what we think might be the only waiver from this administration for being able to continue health care innovation at the state level. We call it the Healthy Indiana Plan. If you take nothing away from the example in Indiana, I encourage you to look at our Healthy Indiana Plan. Designed just a handful of years ago, it's a plan that's been built on top of traditional Medicaid, but it's consumer-driven health care. We have health savings accounts. We call them power accounts. We're moving people from emergency room care to primary care. It is wildly popular by the people that are enrolled in it. More than 95% of the people in this program would re-enroll if they had a chance. And the waiver that we just received is going to allow us to modestly expand this program. But if the Healthy Indiana Plan proves anything, I would say to you, it is that the real pathway forward on health care reform in America is to allow the states to have the freedom to innovate and develop health care solutions that make sense for our people in our communities, in our states. And I want you all to continue all that you're doing in the states from which you hail, to continue to lead by example, as we're attempting to do in the Hoosier State. Lead by example in the policies that you're driving, because make no mistake about it, and I'm sure you heard it from colleagues in Congress. I just heard moments ago that there's more than 90 former ALEC members in the United States House of Representatives. Make no mistake about it. Men and women of good judgment and sound constitutional founding, grounded in the principles of limited government, are looking to the states to see what works. I mean, we can be what that Supreme Court Justice, I think Brandeis, called those laboratories of innovation at the state level. And so I encourage you to continue to lead by your example. I also encourage you today to continue to use your authority creatively to help restore a constitutional balance in our state government. Whether it be advancing a balanced budget amendment, whether it be some fresh and innovative new ideas about cutting red tape in Washington, D.C. I encourage you to take advantage of that authority that our states have, our state legislatures have under Article 5, to drive the amendment process and get this city moving in the right direction. And I would particularly commend to your attention legislation that we've passed in Indiana that I hope is an inspiration to legislators around the country. I don't know that Senator David Long is here. He's the President Pro Tem of the Indiana State Senate. But he authored a Senate Enrolled Act 224, if you're scratching down information or typing it on your iPhone. And it has to do with duties under an Article 5 convention. I mean, I share the same concern as any American who believes in limited government. I cherish our Constitution, and I've heard over the years the concern about the possibility of a runaway convention. Well, here or back home in Indiana, we passed legislation that I was pleased to sign this last May that gives the state legislature control over our Indiana delegates to any Article 5 convention. A delegate who attempts to vote for an amendment unrelated to the Article 5 application or the legislature's instructions would be immediately removed. Because of Senator Long's leadership, I believe the state of Indiana and states that follow us will have a tool to make real progress in leveraging the power of the states to drive real reform at the constitutional level. And I encourage you to follow his and our example in the Hoosier State. But I also want you to continue to clamor for that which is so central to the mission of ALEC, and that is to speak about restoring the proper balance between the national government and the states. And I must tell you that having fought the fiscal battles here on Capitol Hill for more than a decade, I believe, as Republicans in particular, it's important that our agenda not just be simply that we want to see spending cut in Washington, D.C., but we must demand that our leaders in our nation's capital permanently reduce the size and scope of the federal government by restoring to the states the resources and the privileges that are appropriate to them under the Constitution. That's what we have to drive for. And it's hardly a new idea. It's hardly a new idea going back to the Bill of Rights, but also in this contemporary era during these 4 decades of ALEC's existence. It's been an idea that's been percolating among some of our most noteworthy leaders. In fact, this business of federalism I called on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of his birth. I said it was Reagan's unfinished work. And I want to make that case for you before I conclude my remarks. You know, in his first inaugural address, President Reagan, first time before the American people on that cold January day, said words that we remember. He said, it is rather my intention to curb the size and influence of the federal establishment and to demand recognition of the distinction between the powers granted the federal government and those reserved to the states. And then he said words not widely remembered, but they speak right into this moment of our national life. President Reagan said to all of the American people, all of us need to be reminded that the federal government did not create the states created the federal government. He would come to the state of Indiana, I'm proud to say, just 1 year later. It was in February of 1982. And he gave a speech before a joint session of the Indiana General Assembly. Next time you're visiting the State House in Indianapolis, you can stop by because it's emblazoned in bronze on the wall. And the speech that he gave was announcing a national task force on federalism. In fact, ALEC published and distributed 10,000 copies of President Reagan's book, Reagan and the States, detailing the methods for decentralizing government from the federal to the state level. In that speech, he used an analogy of states and federal governments that is worth repeating. He said there's a story about 2 partners who decided to take a day off and go fishing. He said they rowed out to the middle of the lake, baited their hooks, were waiting for the first bite when all of a sudden one of them said, "Sam, oh my gosh, we forgot to close the safe." To which Sam replied, "We're both here, aren't we? No problem." Said for too long, that's been the kind of partnership that the federal government's enjoyed with the states. But in those same remarks before our General Assembly, the President unveiled that task force. And he said, and I'm quoting now, that it was a time of what would be the new phase of the great American experiment. And he said it would last until the end of this century and prepare us for the next. And then looking at those state legislators, President Reagan said, and you here are the ones who will carry this experiment forward. You are the public servants who offer the most creative solutions and most promising hope for our nation's future. You know, I was so moved by those words, so moved by the initiative, but I was frustrated by the fact that they seemed to have gone nowhere. That I made my way just a few short years ago over to the office of the Heritage Foundation of former Attorney General Ed Meese. And I sat down in his office the way a younger man does with an older man, rather sympathetically, and I said, I wanted to talk to you about one speech in particular the president gave. And he said, well, fire away. And I said, well, you probably don't remember it. It may have been one of these things where, you know, he just had to give the speech and you were going through the Midwest, and so we stopped and did it there. But he said he did this speech in February of 1982 on federalism in Indianapolis, and he looked at me and he said, "Mike, I remember that speech like it was yesterday." And I said, "Really?" And I said, "I mean, was this just checking the box? I mean, they just created the task force because this really didn't go anywhere. The president announced 36 federal programs through this task force that he was prepared by executive order to divest back down to the states, and no one took him up on it." And I said, "Why did he want to do this speech? What was the passion?" And he looked at me and he said a few words I'll never forget. Ed Meese said, he said, "Well, first, Mike, you have to remember," and he goes, "a lot of people in this town forget, even those that lionize him." He said, "Reagan was a governor first before he was a president." And he said he was as passionate about federalism as he was about standing up to the Soviet Union and anti-communism. He said limited government was at the very core of who he was. So I said to him, "Well, why didn't this go anywhere? Why didn't it take off?" Because he'd mentioned in his inaugural address, and he launched a national task force. And then Ed Meese said these words to me that ring in my ears, and I hope they'll ring in yours. He said, "Because you didn't have governors like you have today." And I would add parenthetically, you don't have state legislatures like you have today, led by people like those of you in this room. I mean, the truth of the matter, it was a different time in the life of our nation. After decades and decades of the federal government pouring out resources on the states, they had reduced the ability of states to innovate and have flexibility and move about. And so the reflex wasn't there, the leadership wasn't there. But I want to provoke you today with the thought that it's different now. I mean, really and truly, as Linda and I were talking at the table, I think federalism is an idea whose time has come, and ALEC can lead the way. And so I really want to challenge all of you today. I want to challenge you to recognize that you're in a part of government here in American life that enjoys a wide degree of confidence of the American people, at a time that our national government seems to continue to slip farther and farther down in the confidence of the American people. You're living in a time when, including all the leaders in this room and my fellow governors around the country on the Republican side of the aisle, have brought a level of competence and creativity and character to governorships and to state legislatures, the likes of which we haven't seen. So again, do the math. Declining confidence in Washington, D.C., burgeoning national debt, $16 trillion and climbing, and rising confidence in the leadership at our state levels. I want to submit to you today, there has never been a better time in the last 100 years to restore the proper balance of power between the states and the federal government. Federalism is an idea whose time has come. And so I'm here to urge you on. I'm here to thank you for your leadership and to urge you to continue to work and labor. And one other request I would have for you. Linda's about as close as I'm going to get to Iowa for a while. But we're all starting to talk about 2016, aren't we? And let me just encourage you as we think together as Americans about what we're looking for in leadership in my party, the Republican Party. Because I want to tell you, there is some talk these days that we need to find someone who's run something, someone who's been a governor. And I'm certainly sympathetic to that. But let me suggest to you this from my heart. I think it'll be extremely important for all of us who are leaders in this country and in this movement to say this. I'm not looking for someone who's going to say, I'm going to go to Washington, D.C. and run it like I ran my state. I want to hear someone say, I'm going to go to Washington, D.C. and make it more possible for the next person who's running my state to run it with more freedom and more flexibility in a constitutional framework. So with this, I close. I'm really here to pay a debt of gratitude. I can say I was for ALEC before it was cool. I ran a little state-based think tank back in the early 1990s. I know how this group rose up. And the principled men and women who have gathered here this week, some 800 strong, representing some of the strongest leaders in the United States of America, have my thanks and profound admiration for all you do and the sacrifices that you make and the sacrifices that your family makes as you stand in the gap for freedom, for limited government, and for American ideals. And my charge to you is this, just simply, and my prayer for you is this: do not grow weary in well-doing, because in due time, freedom always wins. And when we're doing freedom's work, we're never alone. Because I know with all of my heart that when we labor in freedom's vineyards, we make His work on this earth our very own. Thank you all very much, and God bless you for all that you do for the country and the states that you serve. It's an honor to be with you today.